On the phone, we have a gentleman. I remember playing with the Dodgers in the late 70s, early 80s, and with my beloved Chicago Cubs. Elliott's a little older than me. Elliott remembers him right from the start. Former Dodger and Cub third baseman Ron Say. How you doing today, Ron?
Good, thank you.
I see that you grew up in Washington here and you played at Washington State. Was there any temptation to go right to the minor leagues out of high school?
Well, I had a childhood dream that eventually became a reality, and of course, I was always preparing for the opportunity to play professionally. But I was drafted out of high school, and I decided to explore my options. And it would have been great to start my professional career at that point, but I felt like I really need to get some other things out of the way. I wanted to go to school for a couple of years. The draft laws were a little bit different than they are today back then. And I had an opportunity to sign after my sophomore year at Washington State. And that played out pretty well. And then I was drafted and signed by the Dodgers in 1968.
Yeah, in college back then, there was freshman teams because you couldn't play till your sophomore, right?
That's correct. And we also had the Vietnam War, so you essentially, to have a deferment, needed to be in school.
And I remember that being great incentive to study every once in a while in college.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you weren't up to par with hours and grades, you were facing a 1A classification, and that pretty much sealed the deal to go to Vietnam.
Yeah. How does a guy growing up in Tacoma, Washington, develop his skills compared to, say, somebody who grows up in California, Florida, Arizona, where you have sunshine pretty much year-round, warm weather?
Well, I was pretty naive back then, and I openly admit that. I felt like it was when it was raining in Tacoma and Seattle, that it was raining everywhere in the world. So when I was out playing in the rain, I felt like I was the one who had the advantage. So little did I know later on, of course, the warmer weather states, Florida, Texas, Arizona, California, all had superior advantages, and we didn't have a number of games that was scheduled on the top end. We only played 38 games at Washington State, and I remember seeing Arizona State play in the mid-'80s, so tremendous advantage for them. But still, I was able to accomplish what I needed to do and move on.
You played your sophomore year in college. What made you decide to enter the draft and decide if you could play in the major leagues?
Well, I mean, look, I already knew that that opportunity was going to come. If I got drafted in high school, which I did, I had an opportunity to start it then, but I decided that I was going to wait, and I think waiting helped me mature a little bit, find out what life was outside of the parents' reach, to be on my own, to start doing things, and I didn't think it would be a very good idea when I was 18 years old to try and see what that was like, plus tackle my profession at the same time. So I gave myself a little leeway to get that stuff out of the way, and pretty much played true.
Your transition from college to minor league ball, what was that experience like?
It was an opportunity to start living my dream. Playing every day, seeing what that entails. It's now this is what you're doing. 8 hours a day. You're preparing for games. You're training. You're mentally putting things in place. You are putting together a database essentially in your mind about the players that you face, and use that when you play. So there was a lot of homework in the beginning, but eventually it became things that would reoccur, and so as time went on, and I became a player that was playing every day in the major leagues, the homework got a little bit different.
That Dodger minor league system in the 60s was absolutely loaded. You had yourself, Garvey, Lopes, Russell, Bobby Valentine, Bill Buckner. What was the key? Was it just good drafting, or was it great coaching and managing?
Well, I mean, it's combination of all of those things. You know, we had the 1968 draft, which is heralded as the number one all-time draft, made it baseball history. Essentially, it's been documented many times. There were plenty of other players in that group: Tom Paciorek, Doyle Alexander, Bill Buckner, all who had long careers, successful careers, and you know, you have an opportunity that was created by the Dodgers. You wanted to take advantage of it. I think everybody on that in that group understood the challenges and demands of representing the Dodger organization and its history and tradition, and we were able to make that happen.
Were you glad to see Wes Parker retire so Garvey could play first base?
I think that's the question you probably should give Steve. He wasn't going to be playing third base, and his first opportunity came in left field, which he could not play. So his options were short, and once Vaughn Joshua got hurt in spring training, who was supposed to be our left fielder, and Bill Buckner opening at first base, that created an opportunity for Steve, and he was able to make the best of that.
You played for Walter Alston, who was probably one of the most quiet managers in the history of baseball. You also played for Tom Lasorda, who doesn't quite fit that description. What was it like to play for both of those guys? Well,
I grew up with Tommy in the minor leagues, and you know, I was one of his guys, and he fought for me as he did the others. And I think one of the best assets that he had was he recognized talent, and he surrounded himself with those younger players, and it was actually a key to his way up the ladder, you know, surrounding himself with those players that would eventually have great success in the major leagues. And yes, you were correct in that Tommy and Walt, personality-wise, were completely opposites. And Tommy was more of a hands-on guy, and Walt was pretty quiet and shy. But you know, his words when he spoke were powerful, and he got his point across. And I was fortunate to play for both of those people who became Hall of Fame managers.
When they put that infield together with Garvey at first, Lopes at second, you at third, and Russell at short, did you realize that you guys were going to stay together as long as you did? Because that was a rarity.
Well, no, there's no way to know that. You know, we I don't even think they had records that they were aware of that we were starting to chase at that point in time. I think the second longest running infield in Major League history was probably half of what we did, and I think it was the Cubs infield that stayed together. Now, and I think that was Williams, Beckert, Kessinger, and Santo. And, of course, they did not have the success that we did as a team. Individually, they were very good. Santo and Williams becoming Hall of Fame players eventually. And Santo, because he grew up in the Northwest, at 14 or 15, I guess, I was being compared to being the next Ron Santo, and the comparison eventually became worthy and a reality. So that was it's a longer story to tell, but we ended up having a relationship and we're friends, and glad that took place. But there's no way to really know. We're all out there trying to be individually successful so our team can be successful, and we were in 4 World Series in 10 years, and that's when they had only the National League East and West, so the winners were the only ones who went forward, and it was a 5-game series rather than 7. So things got real tight back then, but for what we did as a unit, we played 8.5 years together, which is a Major League record, and by fact, we are the most successful, not greatest, but most successful infield in Major League history.
And you're also part of a quartet with Garvey, Reggie Smith, and Dusty Baker, the first 4 teammates to hit 30 home runs in the same season. That was in '77.
That's correct. That was Tommy Lasorda's first year managing us, and we gave him a nice start and cushion in April. We ran off a 17-3 record, and by the time May was over with, we were well on our way to winning that division months in advance. So it was a nice present for him. The foursome was the first one in Major League history to do that, and I think it's been done maybe 4 or 5 times after that, but we were the first ones to do it.
But you guys did it at a time when hitting 30 home runs was something. Nowadays, it's a lot more common than back then.
Well, yeah, but you're talking about the steroid era, which is
Right.
something that, we try to avoid talking about. Yes, that's true. But if you look at the number of players who hit 30 home runs last year in Major League Baseball, it kind of goes back to old school. I think Nelson Cruz led Major Leagues in home runs with 40. Giancarlo Stanton was second, I believe, and he missed the last month of the season. And I think there were maybe 5 other guys that did that in all of baseball. So it really does go back to the time when 30 home runs and 100 runs batted in put you probably in the top 5 in both categories.
And Dodger Stadium is a pitcher's park too. I mean, it's not a hitter's park there.
It's always been, but it's a little bit more friendly for hitters today because when we put in our elite dugout seats, we actually moved that up closer to home plate. So we took about half the foul ground behind home plate away, which in reality probably means about an inning a game because of the foul pop-ups that go back and now are in the stands that would have been caught. So it has become friendlier probably by an inning.
Of the 4 World Series that you were in, your favorite?
Well, I mean, obviously the winning of 81 and the icing being an MVP of that World Series was as good as it gets. The 78 World Series was probably the most disappointing because that was a series that we had in hand, and an interference call in the 6th inning of Game 4 when we were ahead 3-0 changed the entire complexion of the series. Reggie Jackson stuck out his hip on a double play ball, and the umpire did not rule it correctly. And if it had been where they, huddled together and had the instant replay, because it's been shown thousands of times, that you'd have seen that it was a voluntary interference, and the inning would have been over, and we probably would have cruised to a victory, and in my opinion, would have won the World Series the day after.
That 81 season it seemed like it was crazy for the Dodgers because you had a young pitcher in Fernando Valenzuela take the nation by storm there, and it seemed like you guys were just destined to win that year, and you got to play the Yankees in that World Series.
Well, yeah. You had 2 of the greatest organizations in Major League Baseball history playing together again, and it was something I think everybody wanted to see. Certainly they were still playing great in the 70s, and we were playing great in the 70s, so it was pretty much a television ideal matchup, and we got to play 3 of those World Series against the Yankees, and it was a thrill.
What was it like leaving the Dodger organization to come to Chicago to play for the Cubs?
Difficult. I had been hoping that I could play my entire career, which for most people doesn't happen. You get to play in one place. Only a handful of guys have ever been able to do that. So eventually everybody gets traded. I was disappointed because I still felt like I had a lot to go yet, and I ended up playing another 5 years. And Chicago was probably the best place for me to go and finish my career because I had family there, and my wife was from Chicago, and it made the transition a lot easier. So that part of it worked out well, and we also had a really terrific team in 1984 that Dallas Green put together. We had the Cy Young winner in Rick Sutcliffe. We had the most valuable player in Ryan Sandberg. And I was fortunate to lead that club in home runs and runs batted in, and we lost that final game of the NLCS in San Diego, and that was equally as disappointing.
I remember writing Dallas Green a letter in the '83 off season, saying right before the '83 season, saying, you know what, you got to get my favorite player, Steve Garvey from the Dodgers. And he's wrote me back. He goes, I'll see what I can do. He brought you in, which I was very happy with. But if he would have brought Steve and you, I think you guys would have won that World Series.
Well, Leon Durham actually played very well for us. Leon ended up, I think, 1 RBI behind me. He hit more home runs and drove in more runs than Garvey. And I think that Leon was probably in his prime at that point, and productivity was great. So I disagree with you on that because when Garvey went to San Diego, I don't think he drove in more than 80 at best, and I don't think he hit 20 home runs down there in one season at all. I think it was more like 10 to 15 at best. So Leon was an asset to us, and we had Larry Bowa at shortstop, so we had a real quality infield.
When you went to the Cubs, did you know that you were going to have to change from number 10, or did you ask for it?
I did, but Leon had it, and I tried to explain to him that I really was trying to follow in the footsteps of Monsanto here, and if he would have given me number 10, that would have kind of topped it off. But I respected his decision, and actually Larry Bowa was there the year before, and Larry had always worn number 10 in Philadelphia, so I figured if Larry couldn't get it off Leon, I probably wasn't going to get it off him either. So.
What made that '84 season so magical? I mean, the Cubs weren't expected to do anything, and they just seemed to do it. What was the key?
Well, there are a lot of things. I mean, if you look at the people that I mentioned that won awards, I mean, you're going to see that that they both had great seasons there. Plus, you look at what Jody Davis did, what Leon did, Bobby Janier, Gary Matthews, Keith Moreland, the everyday 8 guys. You can pretty much say that this was either was their top performance or was close to it for their career. And when you look at the other people that were in our rotation, when you're talking about Steve Trout, who I'm pretty sure had his best year, Dennis Eckersley, who became a Hall of Famer. You had Dick Ruthven and Scott Sanderson. Now that's a pretty good rotation. And then you had a bullpen that got things done. Tim Stoddard, Warren Brewstar, to mention a few, and then you had your closer in Lee Smith. I believe we won 96 games, and we were playing in the same division that the Mets were playing very well, and they had a strong club and an outstanding pitching staff. So the work was there for us to get done, and we just were able to put it together, and the chemistry was great.
How did you know when it was time to hang them up?
When it becomes a job, for the most part. I never considered, although it is a job, but I always had fun. It was always about playing a game that I enjoyed as a kid and having the best time of it. And fortunately, a lot of positive things were accomplished, and we won a lot. And individually, I did well. And so, it kind of came to a point in your career where you're not able to play every day anymore. The same kind of contributions aren't going to be the same. People are going to have different ideas of how to best utilize you, and that may or may not work. And it all became, very difficult not to be playing every day after you've done that your whole career, and not having the same kind of individual success, and just not being able to do some of the things that you knew that you were capable of earlier that you can't get done. So it wears on you a bit, and actually becomes a job, a difficult job. And the handwriting is on the wall. You try to play it as long as you can, do as well as you can, but somebody ends up making a decision for you, and pretty much that's the end of it.
Was the Dodger clubhouse always filled with celebrities? It seemed like whenever you saw it, you had Lasorda, you had Frank Sinatra there, Dean Martin, all these celebrities, Tom Bosley from Happy Days. Was it that a media creation, or was it actually like that?
No, I mean it was there before us and remained, and we didn't have nearly the kind of security that we have currently at Dodger Stadium today. Everybody's walking around with credentials, and security people are everywhere, and it's just different. You can't, unless you have proper identification, you can't get from one place to the next. But those people came in freely, and yes, Frank was there a lot, and became friends with him as well as the others, and really enjoyed that time. It was a lot of fun for all of us.
Why did your singing career not take off? You had third base bag on one side and one game at a time. I don't know if it hit the top of the Billboard charts in '76 or not, but
well, it did in Vero Beach, Florida. They used to play it every half inning in between, the game. But it was all done in fun back then. It was an opportunity to do a baseball jingle, and had fun doing it, and just goes to show you what your 7th grade boys glee class can do for you later on in history.
Did you ever get a chance to talk to and get to know Jackie Robinson?
Did not. Roy Campanella was around a lot early when I was here, in a wheelchair, confined, but he was very gracious, and he knew just about everybody, and was always there to talk. And he had his group of catchers that he spoke with, and I'm sure he gave them a lot of information and knowledge to take forward. And terrific guy.
The Dodger organization seems to be one of the few that embraces its former players. Don Newcomb, longtime member of that illustrious group, as are you. Is there something special about the Dodgers?
Well, yeah, I would say there is. We have had an organization that's had, cut out the last 27 years, of which we have not been to the World Series. But, through the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, the Dodgers were in the World Series multiple times. And that was more about the history and tradition that made them one of the greatest organizations in baseball. And, of course, all due credit to the Yankees. They're on a pillar of their own. All due credit to the Yankees, but the Dodgers over here have had a very successful history and tradition in the past, and based on all those years I told you from the 40s through the 80s of being in the World Series and having the first black player in baseball and Jackie Robinson, all the great players that we've had come before us, the Koufaxes and the Drysdales, and it was just a great organization to be involved in, and they were still in their at peak performance, and we've got to try and get that back here. Our new ownership is fully engaged today in making that happen, and yes, we are spending a ton of money to make it happen, but I don't think they're going to relax and back off of it until we accomplish getting back in and winning the World Series.
I think they realized that the key to success that the Dodgers have had for years and they kind of got away from is the young talent. And you've got that young talent coming up with Puig. You have Peterson here. The young pitchers like Clayton Kershaw. And you're a little older than Zach Greinke. You're getting it done.
We are, but baseball is a different animal today. We are not allowed to nurture the farm system as well as we did back in those times. There's an immediate demand to win today with sabermetrics in place, and the way contracts are going. People are changing places at a rapid pace, and nobody stays in one place more than 5 years now. So we have to be careful about all of that. It's difficult on our fan base because the change in name of the players from year to year is huge. This year in the starting 8, we possibly have a Grandal catching more than AJ. We have 2 middle infielders, and Jimmy Rollins and Howie Kendrick, that came to us this off season. We have a new center fielder in Jock Peterson. We're hoping that he can handle that. We have a realigned bullpen. We have 2 new pitchers in our rotation at the end of that. So we have lots of things to put in place this year. I'm confident that we will get something done. But the Giants are still our biggest nemesis, and all due respect to the Giants as well. They've won 3 titles in the last 5 years, so they have been, over this period of time, the best team in baseball.
Yeah. Well, I'm older than you, so I miss the continuity of the roster where, it might be 2 or 3 new faces a season and stuff like that. And you knew the lineups, you knew who's on the bench.
Right.
It's just a totally different ball game, literally.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's difficult too on our kids who are coming into minor leagues, that are climbing the ladder and putting themselves in a great position for an opportunity. And then you go out and sign some person to a 5-year contract and kind of shoot you dead in the water here. And maybe the best place for you to go is someplace else. But mentioning Jimmy Rollins and Howie Kendrick, that essentially on paper is a short-term relationship as well. Howie Kendrick is in the last year of his contract, I believe. And when you talk about Zach Greinke, Zach has a clause in his contract where he can opt out after this year. So it seems like you have a lot of short-term decisions to make and put a ball club together, and it makes it real difficult for everything.
Do you think there's a chance you might get in the Hall of Fame someday?
No, I think I've probably been ruled out of that. I did not see myself as a Hall of Fame player. I know I was an elite player at my position when I was playing. I know that my friend Ron Santo was 4th all-time in home runs by a third baseman, and I was 5th when I retired. He was 6th in games played, and I was 8th. And this comparison between, as I mentioned earlier, between he and I actually became pretty real. It was an amazing experience for me. And I think that for the most part, from what I'm told by people outside, I still have a fan base out there, which I get fan mail pretty much every day, which I find to be pretty amazing now that I've been out of the game for 27 years. But I've read a few things about the sabermetrics, and people have told me that I'm actually more valued today in this system than I was when I was playing. So it's nice that somebody's paying attention, but I think it's a little late.
Was there any pitcher other than top of the rotation guy who gave you trouble that you just couldn't figure out how he got you out time after time?
Pretty much everybody listed from A to Z. Yeah, it is funny. I look back on it now, and it's pretty. You have a place where you can go, and you can pick up all your statistics. You can see every game that you ever played. You can see every pitcher that you ever faced, and it literally goes A to Z. And when I looked at this list, eventually, so I finally decided to go check it out. I was afraid I was going to be embarrassed, and I probably was embarrassed by looking at it. But there were guys in there that I'm saying, God, did I have that much trouble against him? That's hard to believe. But the toughest guy for me to face that I never felt comfortable with, regardless, and I'm sure that there were other guys who had got me out better than he did, and so on. But Kent Tekulve gave me a lot of trouble. I just never felt comfortable in the box against him. I tried to move up on the plate, I backed off of it. I moved back in the box and moved up in the box. It didn't seem to matter. It seems like he always breaking my bat. But I also, on the plus side of things, I had more home runs off of Steve Carlton and Tom Seaver than I did anybody else against him in my career. So that was the plus side. And,
that's not too shabby.
Yeah, I'm not saying I owned them. I just hurt them at times. That's about the extent of it.
I look at Tommy Lasorda's Twitter account. Every day he's got beautiful women kissing him, hugging him, swooning over him. It's like he's a movie star. Is he that well loved out there?
Yeah, Tommy's pretty much an icon. I think his popularity has probably grown, and he probably feels a need to go on the social media stuff. I do not. I'm not on Twitter. I'm not on Facebook. I'd rather just keep that to myself. But yeah, Tommy is not only our ambassador for the Dodgers, but he's pretty much baseball's ambassador as well. And he has got a schedule that even me being 20 years younger than him, I do not want to. He's on the go all the time, and I was just over in Arizona at our spring training complex, and he's been there the entire time, and he dresses out most every day, and there's not a lot of involvement, but he still enjoys going over there and talking with some of the kids and being around the fans, and yeah, he's been very active still.
Do you ever suit up, get in the batter's box, or play the field, or are those days long gone?
Well, I mean, you'll see me in uniform in spring training when I go over there and do our guest instructors part that I put together here again with our new ownership. I always enjoyed having players that were a part of our history and tradition come to spring training, and now I could put the person with the picture and get to know him and see the teams that he played for and the world championship teams and all that stuff. And we had a very subliminal message going on in Vero Beach, which is, we kind of want you to be that guy, and we want you to be having your teams in these pictures up on the wall as well. So I told Peter O'Malley that. I said, I got the message. I think our other guys got the message as well. And he kind of smiled and said, well, I'm glad that worked. But we had a great time with all of that, and I dress out and I'm watching and in the clubhouse and during the meetings, and then we have an old timers game which we do not play in anymore. But I've got too much arthritis, and I'm just too old to do all of this stuff anymore.
So who's gonna hang it up first, Tommy Lasorda or your announcer, Vince Scully?
Let me just say this. They're both the same age. And I think that they're probably going to be here until it's over. Vinny always has this cordial acceptance of saying, yes, I'm coming back, and I'm going to do one more year, and I think he can do it as long as he wants to. And Tommy's going to be here under the same premise, I believe. They're going to be here as long as they want.
Now, in high school, you were a three-sport star. Have you let Magic Johnson know this and that you'd like to take him on one-on-one?
Well, about the only thing I think I can do probably okay now is probably shoot free throws. I don't think Magic, he has too much of a height advantage, and he weighs quite a bit more than I do, so I don't think I'd be a good one-on-one matchup. But if we were going to go out and play horse, and if I could stand at the free throw line and shoot free throws, I'd probably hold my own.
One last thing. I'm looking at a bobblehead in my office I bought on eBay. It's of Rick Monday with the American flag. What was that game like when that happened?
Well, it was kind of difficult from our vantage point because our dugouts were further back, as I mentioned. We realigned the field a little bit. And all I remember is Rick Monday running over into left field and scooping up something that two kids had brought onto the field, and we did not know it was an American flag at that point in time. And yes, the rest is history. He saved a burning flag, and and has always been remembered for that. But really did not have a great view of what was going on. But I'm certainly glad he went over and was able to wrestle it away for those two kids. I guess that was their way of saying freedom of speech, I guess.
I think that's the first time a team's given away a bobblehead of a player on another team because he's got the Cub uniform on.
Okay. I actually have not seen that one. We usually do. We have a number of giveaways here at Dodger Stadium each year, where we have probably 5 or 6 days where we give away bobbleheads, and it's a fun event for everybody. It's bobbleheads are something that is mainstream today. Everybody's got them.
I saw something the other day. I think it said the Dodgers lead Major League Baseball in giveaways for this 2015 season. So.
Well, I mean, last year and the year before, we led Major League in attendance, and we also led Major League in attendance 2 years ago on the road, I believe, and that was something our clubs used to do back then. It's a great honor. It hasn't been done too many times in Major League history, but certainly we're geared to lead Major League Baseball again in attendance. We were the first team during my era as well. Another thing to add on to the Dodger history and tradition, we were the first team in Major League history to draw 3 million people. And now, factually, they live in the house that we built.